The afternoon sun beat down on Officer Reynolds as she adjusted her cap and squinted against the glare. 6 hours into her shift, and the air conditioning in her patrol car was struggling against the heat. She'd been with the department for just over 3 years now, and days like this made her question her career choices. The radio crackled to life, interrupting her thoughts. Unit 27, we've got a call about suspicious activity at the Pinewood Motel. Possible drug activity. Caller reports an unknown male sitting in a sedan for over an hour. Reynolds sighed and reached for the radio. Copy that, dispatch. Unit 27 responding. She flipped on her lights but kept the siren off as she navigated through the suburban streets. The Pinewood wasn't exactly high-end accommodation. Situated on the edge of town where the nice neighborhood started to fade, it had become a hotspot for various activities the department kept tabs on. Reynolds had responded to calls there at least a dozen times in the past year alone. As she pulled into the motel parking lot, she immediately spotted the vehicle in question, a clean, black sedan with tinted windows parked at the far end. Nothing flashy, but it stood out among the usual vehicles that frequented the Pinewood. Something about it felt off to her. Too nice, too clean. She ran the plates quickly, registered to a rental company. That raised her suspicion even further. Reynolds radioed in her arrival and position before stepping out of her cruiser. The fatigue from her double shift the day before was catching up with her, making her movements more rigid than usual. She'd only gotten 4 hours of sleep before being called in early today when Jackson called out sick. Her supervisor had promised her overtime pay, but right now that hardly seemed worth it. She approached the sedan cautiously, noting a well-dressed black man in the driver's seat. He appeared to be focused on his phone, occasionally looking up toward one of the motel rooms. Reynolds placed her hand on her holster, a habit she'd developed responding to calls in this area. "Police officer," she called out, positioning herself slightly behind the driver's side window. "Roll down your window, please." The man looked up, seemingly startled by her presence. He hesitated before lowering the window, which only heightened Reynolds' unease. "Afternoon, officer," he said calmly. "Is there a problem?" Something about his composure struck Reynolds as unusual. Most people showed at least some nervousness when approached by police, but this man's voice remained steady, his expression neutral. "I need to see some identification," Reynolds said, her hand still resting on her holster. "We received reports of suspicious activity." The man nodded slowly. "I understand. I'm going to reach for my wallet now." His deliberate announcement of his movements made Reynolds even more suspicious. It was the kind of behavior someone familiar with law enforcement procedures might display, but also something someone trying too hard to appear innocent might do. "What are you doing here?" she questioned as he reached toward his inside jacket pocket. "I'm working," he replied simply. "If you'll give me a moment, I can explain everything." Reynolds watched his movements carefully, the fatigue making her more on edge than usual. When he withdrew a wallet rather than ID directly, she drew her weapon. "Hands where I can see them," she ordered, her voice sharper now. "Place the wallet on the dashboard slowly." The man froze, his expression changing from calm to concerned, but still maintaining a level of composure that seemed unusual to Reynolds. "Officer," he said carefully, "I'm a federal agent. I'm going to show you my credentials very slowly." Reynolds didn't lower her weapon. In her experience, people claimed all sorts of things when confronted. "Place the wallet on the dashboard first, then we'll talk about who you are." The man complied, placing the wallet on the dashboard before raising his hand slightly. "My FBI credentials are in that wallet. I'm conducting surveillance for an ongoing federal investigation." Reynolds kept her weapon trained on him. "FBI? You don't look like FBI." As soon as the words left her mouth, she knew they sounded wrong, but fatigue and adrenaline had loosened her filter. The man's expression hardened slightly, but his voice remained professional. "My badge and ID are in the wallet. You're welcome to verify them." Still keeping her weapon ready, Reynolds reached with her free hand and flipped open the wallet. The gold shield and ID card seemed authentic, identifying the man as Special Agent Thomas Washington of the FBI. But something still felt off to her. The ID looked real, but she'd never encountered an FBI agent in her jurisdiction before, and certainly not one conducting surveillance without notifying local law enforcement. "If you're FBI, why wasn't the department notified about your operation?" she questioned, still not holstering her weapon. Agent Washington maintained his composure. This is part of an ongoing federal investigation that requires discretion. Your department chief was notified through proper channels. If you contact your supervisor, they can confirm. Reynolds didn't move. Her training told her to de-escalate now that identification had been provided, but exhaustion and a nagging suspicion kept her weapon drawn. "Step out of the vehicle, please." "Officer," Washington said, his voice still calm but with an edge of authority now. "I've identified myself as a federal agent. Pointing your weapon at me without cause is a serious matter. I suggest you contact your supervisor immediately." A small crowd of motel guests had begun to gather at a distance, watching the interaction. Reynolds noticed a few had phones out recording the scene. The situation was getting away from her, but pride and uncertainty kept her from backing down. "I need to verify your identity first," she insisted. "Step out of the vehicle now." Washington made no move to comply. "I will not exit the vehicle while you have your weapon drawn. I've presented valid federal identification. You need to contact your supervisor." The standoff continued for several tense moments until the sound of another patrol car entering the lot caught Reynolds' attention. Lieutenant Garcia, her shift supervisor, stepped out and quickly assessed the situation. "Reynolds, what's going on here?" he called as he approached. "Sir, this man claims to be FBI, but he's refusing to exit the vehicle for proper identification," she responded, not taking her eyes off Washington. Garcia looked at the man in the car, then at the wallet on the dashboard. His expression changed immediately. "Lower your weapon, Reynolds," he ordered firmly. "Now!" The authority in his voice broke through her tunnel vision. She hesitated for just a moment before slowly lowering her gun, though she didn't holster it yet. Garcia approached the vehicle and looked at the ID. "Special Agent Washington, I apologize for this misunderstanding. Were you notified about the operation?" "I was," Garcia confirmed, his tone professional but with an undercurrent of concern. "Chief received the notification yesterday. It should have been in this morning's briefing." Reynolds felt a cold sensation spread through her chest. She'd missed the morning briefing due to being called in late, but she should have handled this differently regardless. "Agent Washington, please accept my apologies," Garcia said, looking genuinely disturbed by the situation. "Officer Reynolds was not properly informed." Washington nodded, his expression now unreadable. "I understand miscommunications happen, Lieutenant. However, having a weapon pointed at me despite presenting valid federal credentials is a serious matter that will need to be addressed." Garcia nodded grimly. "It will be, sir. I assure you." He turned to Reynolds. "Holster your weapon and return to your vehicle. Wait for me there." As Reynolds finally secured her weapon, she noticed more people recording with their phones. Some were speaking animatedly, clearly discussing what they were witnessing. She felt a sinking feeling in her stomach as she walked back to her patrol car. This wasn't just a misunderstanding or a missed briefing. This was something much worse, and she knew it. As she sat in her cruiser watching Garcia speak with Agent Washington, she replayed the interaction in her mind. Her words echoed back to her. "You don't look like FBI." The implication of those words now hit her full force. What exactly had she meant by that? The question burrowed into her consciousness as she waited for whatever came next, knowing with growing certainty that her career might have just ended in that parking lot. Through the windshield, she could see Garcia nodding respectfully as Agent Washington spoke. The federal agent's composure had never broken, even with a gun pointed at him. Reynolds slumped in her seat, the adrenaline fading and leaving only the heavy weight of consequence in its place. Lieutenant Garcia gestured for Officer Reynolds to join him and Agent Washington. Her legs felt like lead as she stepped out of the patrol car and walked back to where the two men stood. The small crowd of onlookers had grown, their phones still recording. Reynolds tried to ignore them, focusing instead on maintaining what little professional composure she had left. "Officer Reynolds," Garcia said, his voice controlled but tight. "Agent Washington has agreed to explain the situation to both of us. As a professional courtesy," Reynolds nodded stiffly, avoiding eye contact with the FBI agent. Her face felt hot with a mixture of embarrassment and lingering defensiveness. "Perhaps we could speak somewhere more private," Washington suggested, nodding toward the growing audience of motel guests. "My office is just down the street," Garcia offered. "We can meet there in 5 minutes." Washington agreed and got back into his sedan. As he drove away, Garcia turned to Reynolds, his expression grave. "What the hell happened here?" he demanded, keeping his voice low but intense. You pulled a weapon on a federal agent who had identified himself? Sir, I wasn't informed about any FBI operation, Reynolds started, and his behavior seemed suspicious. Garcia cut her off. Even if you missed the briefing, the moment he showed credentials, you should have de-escalated. Instead, you escalated. And what was that comment about him not looking like FBI? Reynolds felt her throat tighten. I didn't mean, save it, Garcia interrupted. We'll discuss this at the station. For now, follow me back and keep your radio silent on this. The last thing we need is this chatter going department-wide before we've handled it properly. The drive to the police station was the longest 10 minutes of Reynolds' career. Her mind raced through possible explanations, justifications, and excuses, but each one sounded hollow even to her. By the time she parked in the station lot, she had settled on the uncomfortable truth. She had messed up badly, and there was no talking her way out of it. Inside, she followed Garcia to his office where Agent Washington was already waiting. He stood when they entered, his posture perfect, his expression unreadable. Please have a seat, Garcia said, gesturing to the chairs across from his desk. He closed the door before sitting down himself. Washington took a seat, but Reynolds remained standing, her body tense. Officer, please sit down, Garcia said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. Reynolds reluctantly sat, perching on the edge of the chair as if ready to bolt at any moment. Agent Washington, Garcia began, again I want to express my sincere apologies for this incident. There was clearly a breakdown in communication and protocol. Washington nodded. I understand miscommunications happen, Lieutenant. But what concerns me isn't just the lack of information sharing. It's the response after I identified myself. He turned slightly to face Reynolds directly. Officer, even after seeing my credentials, you kept your weapon drawn. You questioned the authenticity of my identification. You ordered me out of my vehicle despite knowing I was a federal agent. And you made a comment implying I didn't fit your image of what an FBI agent should look like. His voice remained measured, but his words carried weight. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. Sir, I was concerned about the possibility of falsified credentials. We've had incidents in this area. Officer Reynolds, Washington interrupted, his tone firmer now. I showed you a genuine FBI badge and ID. Your lieutenant has confirmed that your department was notified of my presence. Yet you still refuse to stand down. I need to understand why. The direct question hung in the air. Reynolds looked at Garcia, hoping for some assistance, but her supervisor merely nodded for her to answer. She began, then stopped. The truth was complicated. She was tired. She was on edge. The neighborhood made her nervous. The man didn't match her mental image of an FBI agent. All of these things were true, but none of them were acceptable explanations. I made a mistake, she finally said. I should have de-escalated as soon as I saw your credentials. Washington studied her for a moment. Officer Reynolds, I've been with the Bureau for 12 years. In that time, I've worked with dozens of local police departments across the country. Most of those interactions have been positive and professional. But this isn't the first time I've had a weapon drawn on me after identifying myself as FBI. He leaned forward slightly. What concerns me is that these incidents follow a pattern. They happen in certain neighborhoods or when I'm dressed a certain way, or most commonly, when the officer doesn't expect someone who looks like me to be federal law enforcement. Reynolds felt her face grow hot again. Sir, I'm not here to debate your intentions, Washington said firmly. I'm here to address your actions. And those actions endangered a federal agent, compromised an ongoing investigation, and reflected poorly on your department. Garcia cleared his throat. Agent Washington is right, Reynolds. This isn't just about a misunderstanding. This is about judgment and protocol. He turned to Washington. What would you like to see happen here, Agent? Washington considered the question. I want 3 things. First, a formal incident report filed with both your department and my field office. Second, I want Officer Reynolds to undergo additional training on interagency cooperation and proper escalation protocols. And third, he paused, making eye contact with Reynolds, I want an honest acknowledgement of what happened here today. Reynolds felt cornered. I've already admitted I made a mistake. No, Washington said calmly. You've acknowledged a procedural error, but we both know there was more to it than that. The silence that followed was deafening. Reynolds looked at the floor, then at Garcia, who was watching her with a mixture of disappointment and concern. She started again, then took a deep breath. I made assumptions based on your appearance. I didn't expect an FBI agent to look like you. That affected my judgment, and I continued to doubt your identity even after seeing legitimate credentials. The words felt like stones in her mouth. Washington nodded, his expression softening slightly. Thank you for your honesty, officer. That acknowledgement is important. Garcia leaned forward. I assure you, Agent Washington, we take this very seriously. There will be a full internal investigation, and appropriate disciplinary action will be taken. As they continued discussing next steps, Reynolds' phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it at first, but when it buzzed 3 more times in quick succession, she discreetly checked it under the desk. Her stomach dropped as she saw messages from fellow officers. You on social media yet? Followed by links to Twitter and Facebook. Someone had uploaded the video of her confrontation with Washington, and it was already spreading. Is something wrong, officer? Garcia asked, noticing her distraction. No, sir, she said quickly, shoving the phone back in her pocket. But her hands were shaking now. As the meeting concluded, Washington stood to leave. Lieutenant, I appreciate your cooperation. I'll need to inform my supervisor about this incident, but I believe we can handle it professionally. He turned to Reynolds one last time. Officer, I hope this becomes a learning opportunity. In my experience, the best law enforcement officers are those who can acknowledge their mistakes and grow from them. With that, he left the office, leaving Reynolds alone with Garcia and the weight of what was coming next. Sir, she began, her voice unsteady, the incident is online. It's being shared. Garcia closed his eyes briefly as if pained. Of course it is. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a form. Reynolds, I'm placing you on administrative leave effective immediately. Surrender your badge and weapon while the investigation is conducted. But sir, this isn't a negotiation, Garcia said firmly. The video is out there. The department will need to respond. And right now, the best thing for everyone is for you to step back while we sort this out. As Reynolds slowly unbuckled her gun belt, the reality of the situation finally hit her full force. In less than 2 hours, her career had unraveled. As she placed her badge on Garcia's desk, she wondered if she would ever get it back. Report to Internal Affairs tomorrow morning at 9, Garcia said, his voice softer now. And Reynolds, get a lawyer. She nodded numbly and turned to leave, dreading the walk through the station to the exit. Already she could feel the stares of her colleagues, sense the whispers that would follow her. Outside, the late afternoon sun still shone brightly, indifferent to how drastically her life had just changed. The video had gone viral overnight. By the time Reynolds woke up the next morning, local news stations were already running the story. She sat on the edge of her bed, phone in hand, scrolling through an endless stream of notifications, comments, and messages. Some were supportive from fellow officers, but most were critical, angry, or worse. Police. Officer draws gun on FBI agent and racially charged. Confrontation, read one headline. Officer suspended after, threatening black federal agent claimed. Another. Reynolds tossed her phone aside and pressed her palms against her eyes. She hadn't slept much, replaying the incident over and over in her mind. Each time she tried to justify her actions, but the excuses sounded weaker with every iteration. Her phone rang, startling her. It was Thompson, the union representative. Reynolds, he said when she answered, his voice grim. You've seen the news? Hard to miss it, she replied. Internal Affairs meeting is still set for 9. I'll meet you there. Don't talk to anyone else about this, understood? No social media, no reporters, no fellow officers, nothing. She agreed and hung up, then reluctantly turned on the TV. The local morning news was showing the video, captured by one of the motel guests. The footage was shaky but clear enough to show Reynolds with her weapon drawn, standing beside Agent Washington's car. The audio was muffled, but her voice carried clearly when she said, "You don't look like FBI." The anchor was interviewing a former police officer about proper procedure. Even if there was confusion, the expert was saying, once a federal agent presents credentials, local law enforcement should immediately de-escalate. This officer did the opposite. Reynolds turned off the TV and got ready to face the day. She chose civilian clothes, jeans and a simple blouse, feeling strangely vulnerable without her uniform. As she drove to the station, she noticed a small group of protesters already gathering outside with hastily made signs. One read "Racist Cops Out" in bold red letters. She drove past quickly and parked in the back lot, hoping to avoid them. Thompson was waiting for her at the side entrance, a stocky man with a perpetual frown that seemed even deeper today. "It's a circus out there," he said by way of greeting. "Chief's office has been flooded with calls. The mayor's involved now, too." Reynolds felt sick. "The mayor? This is a PR nightmare, Reynolds. Everyone's scrambling to contain it." He guided her through the hallways where colleagues either stared openly or deliberately avoided eye contact. "The FBI field office has made an official complaint." Agent Washington's supervisor called the chief directly. They reached the Internal Affairs office where Captain Rivera was waiting. Rivera was known for her thoroughness and strict adherence to protocol. Today her expression was unreadable as she invited them in. "Officer Reynolds," she began once they were seated, "I've reviewed the preliminary reports and video evidence. Before we proceed, I want to remind you that this is an official investigation that could result in disciplinary action up to and including termination. You have the right to union representation, which I see you've exercised, and the right to legal counsel if you wish." Reynolds nodded. "I understand." "Good. Now, walk me through what happened yesterday from the beginning." For the next hour, Reynolds recounted the incident in excruciating detail. Rivera asked pointed questions about her decision-making at each step, particularly after Washington had identified himself as FBI. "You stated that his credentials seemed authentic," Rivera noted, reading from the report. "Yet you continued to hold him at gunpoint. Why?" Reynolds struggled to articulate an answer that wouldn't sound discriminatory. The situation felt off. "I was working on instinct." "Your instinct told you a well-dressed man with proper federal identification was a threat?" Rivera pressed. "I missed the morning briefing," Reynolds explained weakly. "I wasn't aware of any FBI operation in our jurisdiction." According to Lieutenant Garcia, even after he confirmed Washington's identity, you appeared reluctant to holster your weapon. "Is that accurate?" Reynolds couldn't deny it. "Yes, ma'am." Rivera set down her notes and leaned forward. "Officer Reynolds, your body camera footage reveals something concerning. After seeing Agent Washington's credentials, you said, and I quote, 'You don't look like FBI.' What did you mean by that statement?" The room fell silent. Thompson shifted uncomfortably beside her. I didn't mean anything specific by it," Reynolds attempted. "That's not going to cut it," Rivera said flatly. "This statement has been interpreted by the public, by Agent Washington, and frankly by many in this department as having racial implications. I need you to explain exactly what you meant." Reynolds felt trapped. Any answer she gave would sound bad, but the truth might be worst of all. "I had a certain image in my mind of what an FBI agent would look like, and he didn't match it." "And what image was that?" Rivera pressed. Reynolds hesitated. "I don't know. Different." "Different how?" Rivera wouldn't let up. "I don't know." Reynolds finally burst out. "I was tired. I was on edge. The neighborhood makes me nervous. It was a gut reaction." Rivera watched her for a long moment. "Officer Reynolds, part of this investigation will include a review of your past arrests, stops, and civilian interactions to determine if there's a pattern of bias in your policing. We'll also be speaking with your fellow officers about any comments or behaviors they may have observed." Reynolds felt the blood drain from her face. "Are you saying you think I'm racist?" "I'm saying we're conducting a thorough investigation," Rivera replied coolly. "Your actions and words raised concerns that need to be addressed." The meeting continued for another hour, with Rivera methodically going through department policies that Reynolds had potentially violated. By the end, Reynolds felt emotionally drained. "We'll be speaking with Agent Washington again today," Rivera concluded. "I understand he's agreed to come in and provide a formal statement. The video evidence will be further analyzed, and we'll have a preliminary decision within 72 hours. Until then, you remain on administrative leave." As they left the office, Thompson looked grim. "That could have gone better," he muttered. "What happens now?" Reynolds asked. "Now we wait." "But Reynolds," he paused, looking uncomfortable. "You should know that the department is under a lot of pressure to make an example here. The chief has elections to think about. The mayor's office is breathing down his neck, and the FBI isn't happy." "You're saying I'm going to be fired," she said flatly. "I'm saying prepare yourself for that possibility." As they rounded the corner toward the exit, Reynolds froze. Standing in the hallway, speaking with Lieutenant Garcia, was Agent Washington. He looked as composed as ever in a crisp suit, his expression serious as he nodded at something Garcia was saying. Washington noticed her first. Their eyes met briefly before Garcia realized what was happening and quickly ushered Washington into a nearby conference room. But not before Reynolds saw the flicker of recognition and something else in Washington's eyes. Not anger or triumph, but something that looked almost like disappointment. Outside, the group of protesters had grown. Reynolds could hear their chants even from the back parking lot. As she got into her car, her phone buzzed with a news alert. The video had now reached national news networks. She sat in her car for a long moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, though the engine wasn't running. 3 years on the force, and it might all be over because of 5 minutes in a motel parking lot. But as the initial shock began to wear off, a more uncomfortable question started forming in her mind. What if Rivera was right? What if there was a pattern she hadn't wanted to see in herself? Her phone rang again. It was her mother. "Honey?" Her mother's worried voice came through the speaker. "I just saw the news." "Are you okay?" Reynolds felt tears forming for the first time since the incident began. "No, Mom," she admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "I'm really not okay." As she pulled out of the parking lot, she caught sight of Agent Washington exiting the building, surrounded by department officials. His presence commanded respect, his demeanor professional despite everything that had happened. Reynolds watched him for a moment, then drove away, wondering if she would ever wear the badge again. And for the first time, questioning whether she should. 3 days passed in a blur of anxiety and isolation. Reynolds had stopped answering her phone after the first day, tired of reporters' calls and messages, from fellow officers asking for the real story. She'd deleted her social media apps after reading comment threads that dissected her character based on a 3-minute video. The only person she spoke to regularly was Thompson, who called with updates on the investigation. On the morning of the 4th day, Thompson called earlier than usual. "They've reached a decision," he said without preamble. "Meeting set for 2 o'clock today." Reynolds' stomach tightened. That was fast. Like I said, there's pressure from all sides. The chief wants this resolved. She spent the morning pacing her apartment, rehearsing possible responses to whatever punishment awaited her. A formal reprimand seemed too light given the media attention. Suspension without pay was possible, though even that might not satisfy the public outcry. Deep down, she knew termination was the most likely outcome. When she arrived at the station, the protesters were still there, though fewer in number. A local news van was parked across the street. Reynolds slipped in through the side entrance again where Thompson was waiting. "Rivera, the chief, and the deputy chief will be in there," he warned as they walked. "They've already informed me of their decision, but they want to deliver it personally." "Is it bad?" Reynolds asked, though she knew the answer. Thompson's silence told her everything. The conference room felt too large for the 5 people gathered there. Chief Patel sat at the head of the table, his expression grave. Deputy Chief Alvarez and Captain Rivera flanked him, both with folders open in front of them. Reynolds and Thompson took the 2 seats across from them. "Officer Reynolds," Chief Patel began formally, "thank you for coming in. As you know, we've conducted a thorough investigation into the incident involving you and FBI Special Agent Washington. We've reviewed all available evidence, including body camera footage, civilian videos, witness statements, and Agent Washington's formal complaint." He nodded to Rivera, who slid a document across the table. "This is a summary of our findings," she explained. "The investigation determined that you violated department policies regarding use of force, professional conduct, and interagency cooperation. Additionally, your statement to Agent Washington raised concerns about potential bias in your decision-making." Reynolds stared at the document but couldn't focus on the words. "As part of our investigation," Rivera continued, "we reviewed your past performance records and found several concerning patterns. There have been 3 previous civilian complaints alleging unnecessarily aggressive behavior during stops, all involving minorities. While those complaints were dismissed at the time due to lack of corroborating evidence, in light of recent events, they take on new significance. Those complaints were investigated and dismissed," Thompson interjected. "They shouldn't be relevant now." "They establish a pattern," Alvarez countered. "One that we cannot ignore." Chief Patel cleared his throat. "Officer Reynolds, based on the findings of this investigation, I have no choice but to terminate your employment with this department. Effective immediately. Even though she'd expected it, the words still hit her like a physical blow. 3 years of her life gone in an instant. You'll receive 2 weeks severance pay, Patel continued. Your department health insurance will continue until the end of the month. You have the right to appeal this decision, though I must inform you that it was unanimous among senior leadership. Reynolds felt numb. Is there anything else? Yes, Rivera said. We're required to report this termination and its cause to the state licensing board. They will conduct their own review to determine if your police certification should be revoked. This was worse than Reynolds had imagined. Without certification, she couldn't work as an officer anywhere in the state. The FBI has also indicated they may pursue further action, Alvarez added. Agent Washington's supervisor has been in contact with the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. Thompson leaned forward. That seems excessive. My client has already lost her job. This incident has implications beyond department discipline, Chief Patel said firmly. The FBI takes threats to its agents very seriously, especially when there are concerns about discriminatory treatment. The meeting concluded shortly after, with Reynolds signing acknowledgement forms in a daze. As she and Thompson left the conference room, Rivera caught up with them. Officer Ms. Reynolds, she corrected herself. There's something else you should know. Agent Washington asked to speak with you. Reynolds stared at her in disbelief. Why would he want to talk to me? I don't know. But he's here in the building. It's entirely your choice whether to meet with him. Reynolds looked to Thompson, who shrugged. It's up to you. Though legally, I'd advise against it. Something in Reynolds needed closure, needed to understand why this had happened and where she went wrong. Where is he? Agent Washington was waiting in a small interview room. He stood when Reynolds entered alone, having convinced Thompson to wait outside. Ms. Reynolds, he greeted her with a nod. Thank you for agreeing to speak with me. Not sure I had much choice, she replied, taking the seat across from him. Your complaint cost me my job and probably my career. Washington studied her for a moment. Your actions cost you your job, Ms. Reynolds. My complaint simply ensured there were consequences for those actions. She couldn't argue with that. So why did you want to see me? To rub it in? No. He sat back down, his posture still perfect, his tone measured. I wanted to tell you something about myself. Before I joined the FBI, I was a police officer in Philadelphia for 5 years. During that time, I was pulled over off duty 8 times. 8 times in 5 years, despite having a perfect driving record. 3 of those times I had a weapon drawn on me, even after identifying myself as law enforcement. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. I'm sorry that happened to you. I don't want your sympathy, Washington said evenly. I want your understanding. What happened between us wasn't isolated or unique. It happens every day in departments across the country. The difference is that most incidents don't go viral, and most officers don't face consequences. So you're saying I'm being punished for a systemic problem? I'm saying you're being held accountable for your actions, which were part of a systemic problem. He leaned forward slightly. The department reviewed your record and found a pattern. That pattern didn't develop overnight. Reynolds felt defensive anger rising. You don't know me. You don't know how I police. I know what I experienced, Washington replied calmly. And I know what the investigation found. The question is, do you? The room fell silent. Reynolds had been so focused on the unfairness of losing her job that she hadn't fully processed the other part of Rivera's report, the pattern of complaints that had been dismissed. I never thought of myself as... She couldn't finish the sentence. Few people do, Washington said. That's what makes bias so insidious. It operates below the level of conscious thought until it manifests in moments of stress or quick decision-making. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table. The FBI has a community relations program that works with local departments on bias training. They're also starting a new initiative focused on officers who've been disciplined for bias-related incidents. It's a rehabilitation program of sorts: education, community service, mentorship. It doesn't guarantee reinstatement, but it has helped some officers return to service with a new perspective. Reynolds stared at the card. Why would you offer this to me? After what I did? Washington stood. Because I believe in justice, Ms. Reynolds, but I also believe in redemption. What happened between us revealed a problem, but it doesn't have to define your entire life. What you do next is up to you. He walked to the door, then paused. The program starts next month. Think about it. As he left, Reynolds remained seated, the business card still on the table in front of her. Outside, she could hear the muffled sounds of the police station continuing its daily operations without her. For the first time since the incident began, she felt something besides anger or self-pity. A glimmer of something that might have been hope, or at least possibility. She picked up the card and slipped it into her pocket, not yet sure what she would do with it, but knowing that whatever came next would require confronting truths about herself she'd been unwilling to see. 6 weeks had passed since Reynolds had cleared out her locker. 6 weeks of avoiding old colleagues, dodging reporters, and explaining to family why she wasn't wearing a uniform anymore. The business card Agent Washington had given her sat on her kitchen counter, untouched but impossible to ignore. She'd pick it up sometimes, run her thumb over the embossed FBI logo, then set it back down. Her appeal to the department had been denied. The state licensing board had suspended her certification pending their own investigation. Her severance pay had run out, and she'd started applying for security jobs, the fallback career for former cops. But even those applications went unanswered once background checks revealed why she'd left the force on. A gray Tuesday morning, Reynolds finally picked up the card and dialed the number. The program was called Repair, Retraining and Education for Police Accountability and Improved Relations. It was housed in a community center in a neighborhood Reynolds had only ever driven through on patrol. As she walked through the doors 2 weeks later, she felt painfully conspicuous, certain everyone knew who she was and why she was there. The orientation room held about 20 people, a mix of former officers and community members. Reynolds took a seat in the back row, avoiding eye contact. A woman in her 50s approached the front of the room. "Welcome to Repair," she began. "My name is Dr. Porter, and I'm the program director. Some of you are here because of disciplinary actions. Others are here as community representatives or mentors. All of you are here because you believe in the possibility of change, in individuals and in systems." Reynolds shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She wasn't sure what she believed anymore. "This program isn't about punishment," Dr. Porter continued. "It's about understanding, growth, and rebuilding trust. Over the next 3 months, you'll participate in education sessions, group discussions, community service, and one-on-one mentoring. It will be challenging. It will be uncomfortable at times. But if you commit to the process, it can be transformative." The first week was brutal. Reynolds sat through lectures on the history of policing, implicit bias, and community perspectives on law enforcement. She listened to testimony from people who'd experienced police misconduct. She watched body camera footage of incidents similar to her own and analyzed what went wrong. During group discussions, she mostly stayed silent, but the facilitators wouldn't let her hide. Reynolds, one asked during the second week, "What was going through your mind when you watched today's video?" The footage had shown an officer drawing his weapon on a black teenager who was reaching for his wallet. Reynolds hesitated, feeling all eyes on her. "I was thinking that could have been me," she finally admitted. The officer said he feared for his safety, but there was nothing threatening about the kid's movements. He just made assumptions. "Like the assumptions you made about Agent Washington?" the facilitator pressed. Reynolds felt her face flush. "Yes." By the third week, Reynolds was paired with a mentor, a retired black police lieutenant named Wilson who had served 30 years on the force. Their first meeting was at a coffee shop near the community center. "So," Wilson said after they'd settled with their drinks, "tell me about the incident." Reynolds had told the story so many times by now, to internal affairs, to the review board, in group sessions, but something about Wilson's direct gaze made her hesitate to give the sanitized version. "I screwed up," she said simply. "I saw a black man in a nice car in a bad neighborhood and I jumped to conclusions. When he said he was FBI, I didn't believe him because he didn't fit my image of what an agent should look like. I kept my gun on him even after seeing his credentials." Wilson nodded. "At least you're honest about it now. That's step 1. What's step 2? Understanding why. Not just saying I made a mistake or I was tired, but really digging into where those assumptions came from." Over the following weeks, Reynolds did exactly that. In one-on-one sessions with Wilson, in group therapy, and in late-night journaling sessions at her kitchen table, she excavated the beliefs that had shaped her policing. She confronted uncomfortable truths about her upbringing, her training, and the culture of the department she'd worked for. "The thing is," she told Wilson during their 6th meeting, "I always thought racists were people who actively hated other races, people who used slurs or joined hate groups. I never thought someone who was just cautious in certain neighborhoods or around certain people could be perpetuating bias." "That's how it works," Wilson replied. "Most bias isn't the burning cross on the lawn. It's the extra scrutiny in the store, the clutched purse on the elevator, the finger on the trigger when it should be on the holster." Reynolds's community service assignment was at a youth center in the same neighborhood where she'd confronted Washington. Twice a week, she helped kids with homework, coached basketball, and slowly, awkwardly, built relationships with families she might once have viewed with suspicion. There was a boy there, about 12 years old, who reminded her of her brother at that age, bright, restless, full of potential. One day he asked her what she did before working at the center. "I was a police officer," she said, the admission still painful. "Why'd you quit?" Reynolds considered lying, giving the simple answer most adults would give a child. Instead, she said, "I made a mistake. A serious one. I treated someone unfairly because of how they looked." The boy studied her with surprising intensity. "My dad says police always do that. He says it's just how they are." "It's how I was," Reynolds acknowledged. "But I'm trying to change." He seemed to consider this. "You're different now?" "I'm working on it," she said honestly. "Every day." In the final month of the program, Agent Washington visited as a guest speaker. Reynolds had known he was coming. His name was on the schedule. But seeing him walk into the community center still sent a jolt through her. He nodded to her briefly before taking his place at the front of the room. Washington spoke about his experiences as both a local officer and a federal agent, about navigating spaces where people didn't expect him to belong, about maintaining professionalism in the face of prejudice. He didn't mention Reynolds or their encounter directly, but the parallels were unmistakable. After the session, Reynolds approached him hesitantly. "Agent Washington," she began, "I wanted to thank you for recommending this program." He studied her, his expression thoughtful. "Has it been helpful?" "Yes, more than I expected." She paused, gathering courage. "And I wanted to apologize. Properly this time. What I did was wrong, not just procedurally wrong, but morally wrong." "I'm sorry," Washington nodded slowly. "I appreciate that. A genuine apology means more than most people realize. Your work with this program, coming here to speak after what happened, that can't be easy. It's necessary," he said simply. "Change doesn't happen without discomfort." As the program came to its end, Reynolds received an evaluation from Dr. Porter. It noted her progress, her willingness to engage with difficult topics, and her commitment to the community service component. The final paragraph addressed her professional future. "While repair cannot guarantee reinstatement to any law enforcement position, we can and do provide recommendations to departments and licensing boards when appropriate. Based on Ms. Reynolds' participation and growth during this program, we would support her return to service following a supervised probationary period and continued education." It wasn't a guarantee. The state board would make their own decision. Even with her certification reinstated, departments might hesitate to hire an officer with her history. But it was something, a chance she hadn't been sure she deserved. On her last day of community service, the 12-year-old boy approached her as she was gathering her things. "My dad says you're not like other cops," he told her. "I'm not a cop anymore," she reminded him. "But you might be again, right? My mom heard you talking about it." Reynolds considered this. "Maybe, if I get the chance, I'd do things differently." How? She thought about all she'd learned, all she'd confronted in herself over the past 3 months. "I'd remember that the badge is about protection, not power. I'd remember that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, no matter where they live or what they look like. And I'd remember what it felt like to be on the other side of judgment." The boy nodded, seeming satisfied with her answer. As Reynolds left the center for the final time, she felt a weight lifting, not the burden of consequence which she'd earned, but the heavier burden of denial that had kept her from seeing the truth about herself and her actions. Whatever came next, reinstatement or a new path entirely, she would carry this clarity with her. The incident that had ended her career had also forced her to confront truths she might otherwise have spent a lifetime avoiding. In that way, facing Agent Washington across the barrel of her gun had been both an ending and a beginning.